Welcome to the deep dive. So, you've been thinking a lot lately about that feeling, right? That sting when you feel misunderstood, and also how fast we all seem to size people or things up, judging the book by its cover.
Mhm.
And you mentioned it feels like it's everywhere now. Maybe lower attention spans, that constant need for like instant gratification,
Mhm.
algorithms feeding us stuff, just the sheer amount of information we're swimming in. Our brains are just trying to cope efficiently.
It's a really interesting paradox you've pointed out, because we hear it all the time, don't we? Don't judge a book by its cover.
Right.
But then look at the world. You're drowning in choices. YouTube,
Mm.
Netflix, games, actual books.
Yeah.
You have to make snap decisions sometimes just to, well, function. What kind of things were making you think about this specifically?
Uh, just endlessly scrolling through recommendations. You
Uh,
see a thumbnail, a title, maybe a 2-second clip, and boom, you've made a judgment.
hmm.
Even though, logically there might be something amazing just underneath that surface. It feels like you have to do it, but it also feels, I don't know, a bit cheap. So the mission today is really to get under the hood of this whole thing. Why do we judge so quickly?
Yeah.
And crucially, what can we do, both when we're the ones feeling unseen and maybe when we're the ones doing the quick judging? You raised some great points like, is it the consumer's job not to judge? Are we entitled to? What about clickbait from creators?
Right.
And in conversations, this pressure, quick wit versus actually listening. How do you manage it?
Yeah.
Especially, you mentioned if you try to be empathetic but hit a wall, we're kind of trying to figure out, is this constant misunderstanding just the times we live in? Is it something about us? Or, a messy combination?
And I think what's really key here and what we can explore is the underlying cognitive reality,
Hmm.
why our brains actually work this way. It's often less about being shallow
Mm.
and more about how we're built to process a really complex world.
Okay, let's dig into that then. The cognitive side. Why are we wired this way? To make these snap judgments?
Well, fundamentally, our brains prioritize speed and efficiency. Think about it. We're bombarded with stimuli, right? We have limited time. So the brain relies on what psychologists call heuristics.
Okay.
These are like mental shortcuts. Quick rules of thumb. You hear a loud, sudden noise, you flinch, you see a certain expression, you make an assumption. It helps us navigate quickly.
Makes sense.
Now, layer the modern digital world on top of that. Constant scrolling, swiping, super short videos, notifications. It trains our brain for that rapid-fire processing.
Uh-huh.
So judging a video by its thumbnail or losing patience in a conversation quickly, it's not necessarily a character flaw. It's partly our brain adapting, maybe even over-adapting to this high-speed environment.
Okay, that framing helps. It's like a survival mechanism for information overload. But then we circle back to that core conflict. Don't judge a book by its cover yet. We all do, constantly. How do we square that circle?
It's a tension, for sure. And maybe the answer isn't about eliminating judgment, but understanding its place. So from the consumer side, the person choosing the video or the book, we have to acknowledge, yeah, sometimes you need to judge quickly. You just don't have infinite time or attention.
Right, it's practical.
Exactly. But then for the creator, the responsibility is to make that cover, the thumbnail, the title, the opening hook, engaging, yes, but also reasonably representative, not outright deceptive, hopefully.
Integrity matters.
It should. And for the consumer,
Uh-huh.
again, even when making that quick judgment, it's maybe holding it a bit lightly, recognizing, okay, this is my first impression based on limited data. It might be wrong. So
Okay.
it's maybe less about not judging and more about curiosity after the initial judgment.
So a shared responsibility. Creators offer an honest doorway, and we try to remember it's just a doorway, not the whole house. Okay. Now let's shift that to people. Conversations. It really does feel sometimes like there's pressure to be on, doesn't it? Witty, quick, engaging, like a performance.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this touches on a really key difference. Performance versus presence.
Okay, tell me more.
Performance is often about projecting a certain image, aiming for applause, managing impressions for an audience. Think public speaking or even sometimes, unfortunately, social media. It's geared outward.
Mm-hmm.
Presence, though, is more about being genuinely there with the other person. Attentive, receptive, allowing for pauses, for, real connection to emerge. It's more inward focused or maybe relationship focused.
Right.
And the problem arises, the wall you mentioned, when one person comes in expecting or delivering a performance, snappy lines, charisma, and the other is looking for presence, for that deeper, quieter connection. They're just operating on different wavelengths. It can feel really jarring.
That distinction is so helpful. Performance versus presence explains a
Yeah.
lot of those interactions that feel Off. Okay, so you mentioned this idea of troubleshooting if you often feel misunderstood. Let's walk through that. First
Mhm.
sign, feeling rushed to explain yourself.
Yeah, that's a common one. And it often ties back to what we just discussed, the pace of digital culture. Everything feels accelerated. We expect quick answers, quick summaries.
So we interrupt or we signal impatience.
Exactly. Or the environment itself just doesn't allow for unfolding thoughts. So if you feel this, the counter move is often internal first. Consciously slow yourself down, try to model the pace you'd prefer, and maybe sometimes explicitly ask for more time or space. Hang on, let me finish that thought, or could I take a moment to explain that more fully?
Practice the pause, like that 3-second pause idea you mentioned. Okay. What about the next one, people jumping to negative conclusions about you?
Mm-hmm. That can sting. It might stem from their own biases, their own filters, or again, just them being rushed and falling back on stereotypes or assumptions.
So it's not necessarily about you.
Often it's not. The crucial thing here is not to automatically internalize it. Their snap judgment reflects their processing, not your inherent worth or intention. You can clarify gently if needed, actually what I meant was, but try not to carry the weight of their assumption. It's theirs, not yours.
That's a freeing thought. Okay, what if it feels like you're constantly misunderstood, like it's a pattern?
Okay, if it's a recurring pattern, that does invite some gentle self-reflection. It could be something about your communication style. Are you maybe unintentionally unclear sometimes? Or perhaps there's a mismatch between your style and the typical style in certain environments you're in.
How do you figure that out without just blaming yourself?
Good question. Feedback is key.
Hmm.
Ask trusted friends or colleagues, people who know you well. Hey, sometimes I feel misunderstood. How do I generally come across to you? Is there anything I do that might be confusing? Look for patterns, not blame. Reviewing past misfires can also help. What was the context? What did you say? How was it interpreted? It's about learning and adapting, not judging yourself.
Looking for growth opportunities. Okay. What about feeling overly sensitive to being judged?
Yeah, that heightened sensitivity often has roots. It could be past experiences, maybe trauma, maybe underlying anxiety, things that make any perceived judgment feel much bigger, much more threatening.
So what helps there?
Well, self-compassion is huge. Recognizing where that sensitivity comes from, being kind to yourself about it,
Yeah.
often learning to give yourself the empathy and understanding you crave from others is the first step. It starts within.
Empathy starts with self. I like that. Last one on this list. Constantly attracting shallow or impatient listeners.
This one can be tricky. It might be partly about the environment. Maybe
Yep.
the places or contexts where you're having these conversations just attract that kind of interaction. Fast-paced, surface level. Or it could be that you just haven't found your people yet, the ones who appreciate your depth or your particular way of communicating. The action here is often about actively seeking out different spaces, different kinds of interactions, different people who value nuance. It's a filtering process sometimes. Not everyone is your audience.
So it's not necessarily fix yourself, but maybe find your context. You said the common factor might be you, but that gives you the power to adapt. How do we use that power constructively?
Right? It's not about blame, it's about agency. One strategy is this idea of lead with clarity, reveal with depth.
Okay, what does that look like?
It means starting your communication in a way that's pretty accessible, easy to grasp, give people an entry point. Then, once you have that connection, you can gradually unfold the more complex layers. For example, instead of launching into a super nuanced point immediately, you might say,
Oh,
people sometimes see my passion as intensity, and it can shut them down. But really, I just care deeply about this, and here's why. You frame it first.
okay. Given the headline, then the story. I like that. What else is in the toolkit?
Asking questions that invite reflection, not defensiveness. This is huge in navigating potential misunderstandings.
Example.
Instead of say, why did you assume that? Yeah, which can feel accusatory. Try something softer, more curious. Like, I'm curious, what was your takeaway from what I just said? Or, have you ever felt people judged you quickly before they really knew you? It opens up dialogue instead of shutting it down.
Yeah, those feel much more collaborative. What else?
Letting go of needing everyone to get you. Seriously. Some people just won't be on your wavelength, or they won't have the capacity or interest for the kind of depth you offer. And that's okay. See it as a filter, not a personal failure. Focus your energy where connection is possible.
Manage your expectations.
Exactly. And related to that, try to understand the time crunch others might be under. Remember our earlier point. Sometimes quick judgments aren't personal attacks. They're just bandwidth issues. Someone's juggling 10 things. Reframing it helps. okay, maybe they didn't have time to really hear me. Not that it wasn't worth hearing. It protects your own emotional energy.
That reframe feels really useful, actually. Takes the sting out a bit.
Ugh.
Okay, let's zoom out again. You mentioned cognitive science system 1 and system 2 thinking. How does that help explain the quick judgments?
Right. Daniel Kahneman's work. Brilliant stuff. Basically, he suggests we have two modes of thinking. System one is fast, intuitive, automatic, emotional. It's our gut reaction, our pattern recognition. Super useful for quick decisions.
Like swiping left or right.
Exactly. Or recognizing a familiar face instantly. Then there's system two. That's slow, deliberate, effortful, logical. It's what you use for complex calculations, weighing pros and cons, deep analysis. Now, the argument is that our modern world, especially the digital environment with its algorithms optimized for engagement, which often means triggering emotion and speed, pushes us constantly into system one.
Ah, so the environment biases us towards the fast thinking.
Precisely. It makes judging by the cover, acting on impulse, the path of least resistance, it becomes habitual, almost systemic. So countering this requires conscious effort. We need to intentionally create or seek out slow spaces, moments, conversations, activities where system two thinking can actually happen.
Right.
And importantly, remember, system one judgments, those quick takes aren't inherently evil, they're efficient. The danger is treating them as the final word, as absolute truth, instead of what they often are, a first draft, an initial hypothesis that might need revision.
Especially with people.
So notice the gut reaction, but don't stop there.
Got it. You also made a point about culture, how capitalism kind of rewards simplicity, those catchy covers. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, it's a bit ironic, isn't it? We preach depth, but the market often rewards the surface. Think about online content. Clickbait titles exist because they work. They grab attention in a crowded space. Book covers, often meticulously designed and tested based on market data for maximum visual appeal. Movie trailers, cut to perfection to hit emotional beats quickly. Streaming thumbnails, A/B tested endlessly.
Even dating profiles, right? Boiling people down.
Exactly. It's reductive.
Yeah.
In competitive marketplaces, having a good cover, a compelling, easily digestible first impression, becomes almost an economic necessity. This pushes towards simplification, sometimes oversimplification.
And that creates pressure.
Huge pressure. Performance anxiety for creators, pressure on individuals to present a polished, easily sellable version of themselves. Our attention itself becomes a commodity, and the structures in place often reward speed and simplicity, inadvertently penalizing nuance and complexity. It's not just individual failing, it's baked into the system.
We're incentivized to be sound bites. Okay. Shifting. Again, you talked about social philosophy, how misunderstanding can be a power dynamic. What did you mean there?
Misunderstanding isn't always neutral, is it? It often falls harder on certain groups. Maybe people who are neurodivergent, people from minority backgrounds, anyone who doesn't quite fit the dominant mold, or even people who are more emotionally expressive or quieter in contexts that don't value that.
How does it become a tool of power?
Well, labeling someone can be a way to dismiss them or maintain control. Think about phrases like, oh, you're just being too sensitive, or you're intimidating, or you're just too hard to follow.
I've heard those.
Right. Sometimes those statements say more about the listener's lack of willingness or capacity to engage or their own discomfort than about the speaker's actual communication. It shifts the burden unfairly. Simone Weil had that beautiful quote, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." True listening, true understanding takes effort. It's an ethical act, in a way, not just passive reception.
Understanding as generosity. That's powerful. Okay, so it's easy to focus on being misunderstood, but you flipped it too. We need to look at when we might be the ones judging too fast.
Absolutely crucial. We have to turn the mirror around. Do I dismiss people quickly based on a first impression? Do I get impatient when someone takes a while to articulate their thoughts? Do I expect people to just get me without providing enough context? Do I sometimes equate complexity with value or simplicity with shallowness automatically? If we want patience and understanding from others, are we modeling it? Are we offering the grace we hope to receive? It's that inward and outward loop of empathy. We need both.
That reciprocity is key, which leads to the question about judgment itself. Is all judgment bad? Or is it more nuanced?
I think it's definitely more nuanced. Maybe the issue isn't the initial judgment, that quick system one impression, because that might be unavoidable sometimes. The real issue might be the closure that often follows.
What do you mean by closure?
Like making that snap judgment and then done. Box ticked. No further curiosity. No openness to revision. Good judgment, arguably, evolves. It stays open to new information.
So less snap judgment and more snap closure is the problem.
Exactly. It's okay to have a first take as long as you mentally add a little footnote based on what I know so far. So instead of, that guy looks arrogant, maybe it's, he seems quite reserved or maybe focused. I wonder what's driving that. It shifts from a verdict to a question.
That small shift feels huge, keeping the door open.
Okay, you also talked about identity performance, this pressure to perform who we are.
Yeah, it's everywhere, isn't it? Social media profiles, dating apps, job interviews. We're constantly crafting and presenting a version of ourselves. The challenge is, not all personalities or depths perform well in short bursts. Someone naturally charismatic might shine instantly. Someone more introspective or whose wisdom unfolds slowly might seem underwhelming in that first 5 minutes.
So you feel forced to adapt. Right. And that's the paradox. Adapt too much, and you feel like a fake, like you're wearing a mask. But refuse to adapt at all, and you risk being constantly overlooked or misunderstood in these fast-paced contexts.
That's a tough spot.
It really is. Finding authenticity becomes this balancing act between translating who you are effectively for the situation and maintaining your core integrity. It makes you ask, who are you when the lights stop, when no one's applauding? Are you okay being misunderstood sometimes if it means staying true?
That's a deep question. Okay, for people listening who do often feel misunderstood, what are some practical ways to cope, to thrive without burning out?
Firstly, know your audience, or maybe choose your audience. Recognize that some interactions are just going to be surface level, like fast food, quick, convenient, serves a purpose.
Right.
Others have the potential for depth. A home-cooked meal shared over time. You don't offer a 7-course meal to somebody who just wants a snack, right? So choose where you invest your full energy and depth. Not every conversation needs your whole story.
Conserve your energy. Makes sense.
And actively create or seek out those slow spaces. Your close friends, maybe a book club, long-form podcasts, projects where nuance isn't just tolerated, it's welcomed. Find places where your symphony can actually be heard.
And flipping it, for those of us realizing, ouch, maybe I'm the quick judger sometimes. What can we do?
Awareness is the first step. Always.
Oh.
Try to catch yourself in the act of making a snap judgment. Just notice it without beating yourself up. Then gently ask, okay, what else could be true here? What am I maybe not seeing?
Introduce that doubt.
Exactly. And practice pauses in conversation. Let there be silence. It feels awkward sometimes in our fast culture, but it gives space for thought, for system 2 to kick in, for both people. Don't feel you have to fill every gap. And maybe consciously practice giving second impressions. Revisit an initial judgment you made about someone or something. Did more interaction change your view? Actively look for contradictory evidence.
Train yourself to look deeper.
Okay.
You used that metaphor earlier, song versus soundbite. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's just a way to think about communication styles in depth. Some people, or some ideas, are like sound bites. They hit fast, grab attention, make an immediate impact. Very useful in some contexts.
Yes.
Others are more like symphonies. They have layers, complexity, maybe slower introductions, themes that develop over time. They require more sustained attention to fully appreciate.
So if you feel like a symphony,
Don't be surprised or dismayed if people rushing by only catch a few notes and move on. It doesn't diminish the value of the whole piece. And maybe try to have some grace for the soundbite people too. They're often just using the instrument or playing the tune that the environment demands or that comes most naturally to them.
that's a very generous way to look at it. Now, you also posed a really critical self-check. Could feeling misunderstood sometimes be a kind of defense?
Yes, this is the tough love part maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to consider, honestly. I misunderstood sometimes be masking something else.
Like what?
Like maybe avoiding taking responsibility for not being clear. Or having unrealistic expectations that people should just know what you mean without you explaining it properly. Sometimes, dare I say, it can even mask a kind of subtle feeling of superiority. My thoughts are too complex for these simpletons.
Ooh, yeah.
And that attitude, even if subconscious, can be really isolating. So the antidote is radical self-honesty. Am I genuinely being misunderstood despite clear communication? Or am I maybe being a bit vague, overly complex just for complexity's sake, or hiding behind a veil of mystique? It requires courage to ask that.
Definitely takes courage. Okay, another interesting layer you added was the cross-cultural one. Listening versus expression.
Right. We're speaking in English in a broadly Western context where direct self-expression is often highly valued. Be clear, be assertive, say what you mean. But that's not universal. In many other cultures, communication norms might prioritize listening more, pausing longer before responding, valuing indirectness or nuance, showing deference. So a perceived misunderstanding might actually be a clash of cultural communication styles, not necessarily a failure by either person.
So context is everything, even cultural context. What about those frustrating situations where one person does seem to get it and the other just doesn't, no matter how hard you try?
Yeah, that's tough. It can feel really unbalanced and draining. A few ways to approach it, maybe. One is teach, don't preach.
Yeah.
Model the curiosity and depth you're hoping for rather than criticizing their lack of it.
Okay.
Another is filter, don't force. Recognize that maybe this particular interaction just isn't destined for depth. Accept it, keep it lighter, and save your energy. And third, crucially, protect your energy. If someone consistently refuses to meet you halfway, shows no curiosity, constantly misinterprets you negatively despite your best efforts, at some point, it might just be incompatibility. It's okay to limit exposure or engagement in those cases. It's not your job to make everyone understand you.
Setting healthy boundaries, super important. Okay, you briefly touched on evolutionary psychology too, tribalism, snap judgments for survival.
Yeah, it's just acknowledging the deep roots of this. For much of human history, being able to quickly categorize friend or foe, safe or dangerous, in-group or out-group, was literally a matter of life and death. Those circuits are deep in our brains.
But they misfire now.
They can, absolutely. The quick categorization that protected us on the savannah can sometimes trap us when dealing with the incredible complexity of modern, diverse societies. That quote you liked summed it up. What protected us in the savannah can imprison us in the cityscape of human complexity.
Oh,
Our instincts haven't fully caught up with our environment.
that really puts it in perspective. And you link this to the paradox of choice idea.
Right, Barry Schwartz's concept, the sheer volume of choices we have today in consumer goods, media, even potential partners, actually forces faster, more superficial judgments. We can't deeply evaluate everything.
So we skim.
We have to skim. It leads to decision fatigue, analysis paralysis if we don't, so we become, as you put it, ruthless editors. But the risk, Schwartz points out, is that in editing so quickly, we inevitably discard things, maybe even masterpieces, that required a bit more time to reveal their value. Abundance forces superficiality, paradoxically.
Wow. Okay. You also brought Aristotle into this. Virtue ethics and phronesis. How does that ancient wisdom apply here?
Well, Aristotle's idea of phronesis, or practical wisdom, isn't about never judging or judging instantly. It's about developing the virtue, the skill, of knowing when and how to make good judgments in particular situations.
So it's a skill to cultivate.
Exactly. It involves things like humility, recognizing you might be wrong, curiosity, wanting to understand more deeply, and openness to revision, changing your mind based on new evidence. So from this view, judgment itself isn't the enemy. The enemy is poor judgment that's rash, closed off, arrogant, lacking that practical wisdom.
Focusing on the quality of judgment, that's helpful. And the artistic critique angle surface versus depth in our image world.
Yeah, just reflecting on how much emphasis is now placed on the cover, the book jacket, the movie poster, the album art, the website landing page. These were once just invitations, portals. Now, sometimes they almost become the experience, or at least the main gatekeeper. A great cover is essential. But it can also set up rigid expectations or lead to instant dismissal if it doesn't perfectly align with what someone thinks they want in that split second. The cover is a potential prison for the content inside.
Yeah, limiting our view. You also made sure to acknowledge the emotion, the ache of not being seen. Why was that important to include?
Because this isn't just an intellectual puzzle, is it? For the person feeling misunderstood, there's often a real visceral feeling involved. A loneliness, a frustration, maybe a sadness. To offer something you feel is rich or deep and have it just glanced over or dismissed, it hurts. It taps into our fundamental human need to be seen and understood. Acknowledging that quiet grief, as you called it, just felt necessary to honor the human heart of this issue.
Absolutely. And your final vision was about building a culture of slowness. What could that actually look like?
It's really an antidote to the frantic pace. It means intentionally making space for depth, cultivating friendships where you can take time to understand each other, not just exchange updates, having conversations where pauses are okay, where listening is valued as much as speaking, maybe consciously choosing to engage with media or art that requires sustained attention, supporting creators who prioritize depth over clicks. It's about valuing the slow gardens where complexity can actually grow, instead of just demanding faster and faster news feeds. A small rebellion, maybe.
A necessary rebellion, perhaps. Okay, so bringing it all together, you offered some really practical, try these practices tools. Can you recap, though?
Three main ones. First, narrative priming. Give people a quick headline or frame first,
Yeah.
then fill in the details, like that example. I know I can seem intense. It's because I care deeply involved. Let me explain. It orients the listener.
Got it. Headline first.
Second, use the curiosity loop. Ask those open-ended reflective questions. What stood out to you in that? What's your take on this part? It invites collaboration and understanding.
Okay.
And third, practice meta-awareness. That means actually naming the dynamic if you feel a disconnect. Gently saying something like, I get the sense we might be interpreting this differently. I want to unpack that together. It brings the process of understanding itself into the conversation.
Narrative priming, curiosity loop, meta-awareness, very concrete. And your final thought really circled back to the core feeling.
Yeah, just acknowledging that, look, feeling misunderstood is painful. It hits our social core. But it's also partly a symptom of living in this incredibly complex, fast-paced world. And sometimes your depth, your symphony, is a gift that just takes a bit longer to be recognized. But ultimately, you're not just a cover. You're a whole story. And the right readers, the right listeners, they will take the time.
That's a really hopeful note to end on. So, as you, our listener, think about all this, maybe reflect, where do you see these dynamics playing out in your own life? Do you feel more like a soundbite or a symphony? And how are you navigating this world that seems to demand one while maybe needing the other? This has been a real deep dive and hopefully just the start of more thinking for you about cognitive biases, communication, and what it really means to understand and be understood. Thanks so much for joining us.